Good day, everyone. This is co-host John Schlarbaum, here to inform you that a new companion book to the podcast is now out. Titled Music Virgin No More, I delve deeper into how my weekly charts began and why the music from the early 80s still influences the preferences of millions of listeners 45 years later. Again, the book is Music Virgin No More, a fun and easy read filled with facts about the singles, albums, and groups you still love today. Purchase your copy on Amazon for only $15, and thanks for downloading today's episode, which begins right now.
CJBK London, it's 154.
Welcome, music fans, to the Music Virgins No More podcast. Now here are your hosts, John and Jason.
Hello, and welcome to the Music Virgins No More podcast. I'm John Schlarbaum.
And I'm Jason Kapanaugh.
Now, for those new to the podcast, here's a little background about us. Jason and I believe Freddie Mercury of Queen was one of the best frontmen in rock and roll history, and that his replacement, Adam Lambert, proves this every time he steps on stage to do a full-blown Queen karaoke concert. Although there's a 20-year age difference between Jason and me, we have remained friends for now 20 years.
And as for the show itself, it's based on John's fond memories of top 40 music between 1979 and 1982, when he created 106 weekly music charts typed on a Smith Corona portable typewriter alone in his childhood bedroom between the ages of 13 and 16.
All alone, Jason. That continued on for several more years. But each podcast will dive deep into these historic charts and discuss the music that in part became the soundtrack to my life and also my friends in high school.
Today on the podcast, we will be reviewing what is happening between January and August 1980, the period leading up to the point where John said to himself, hey, I should make my own music charts.
That's exactly how I sounded too, Jason. You're like a ventriloquist. It's crazy. Now, on the last week's show, we discussed 1979, which was the first real year that I began to collect records, either albums or 45s. And then I started faithfully watching the rise and fall of all these songs on the national and local AM radio charts. But the new decade began with a slew of classic songs by both old and new artists, most of which I still listen to 4 decades later. And as much fun as it was to look back at the charts that began the week of August 23rd, 1980, which was chart number 1, it's also interesting to see what music came before that chart, as 13 of my top 20 year-end singles were released between January and August.
In fact, 9 of your top 11 year-end singles were from earlier in the year. And this is surprising because many of the acts released their big singles in the fall to capitalize on Christmas sales. Also, 8 of your top 10 year-end albums were released before your first chart. Do you think this is a case of just having more time to listen, because of your age and you're sitting alone in your bedroom, or what?
I think that's probably partially the case, especially on the album side. As we go along, you'll find out that, when you look at my album, how many albums, I think I end up, over a 2-year period, getting 76 albums, that were on the charts. That means I physically, or my dad physically, one of us, went to a record store and physically bought 76 albums and brought them home and listened to side A and side B and repeat and onward and following the lyric sheets and stuff. And I think with the later on, you'll see that it's really my albums that you'll see what kind of music I really enjoyed, where singles are all, fun every week there's a new, hit song, but then you look at the albums, go, yeah, that's what I was really into. But when you look at the very first album chart for October 4th, 1980, and that was part number 7. At number 10, we had Christopher Cross's self-titled album, and that was released, as you said, with Christmas on December 20th, 1979. So obviously he's thinking he's going to have big Christmas sales. Also early in the year, you had Bob Seger's massive hit Against the Wind. That was released in February. For my birthday, I received Duke's or Genesis, the Duke album in March. And then you also had Billy Joel's Glass Houses was released in March. And even though the first number one album on my charts was Queen's the Game, which was released in June, I had been listening to 3 pre-release singles since the previous October when Crazy Little Thing Called Love came out, followed by Save Me and Play the Game. So I was still listening to a lot of albums that had come out in 1979, obviously between January and August. But even on my charts, these albums are still hanging around.
And what were you listening on mostly? Was it headphones, speakers? What was your main listening experience?
Probably a little bit of both. It depended on who was home, what time of day it was. If my mom was watching TV downstairs, I would basically only listen to anything in my room or until I'm 14 and my brother moves out. You would always just listen on his stereo. But for a lot of the times, it would be just me sitting in like a favorite chair. If you go to the Music Virgins No More webpage, you will see me sitting in this cool brown chair I would have headphones on, or that's where I'd be sitting to listen or listen to albums and also read the lyrics from the albums.
Because your dad was a minister, did lyric content ever dictate whether you wore headphones or not?
Yeah, I mean, it did on a few occasions. I think we'll actually bring up a couple of occasions. One was Journey's Lovin', Touchin', Squeezin', and I thought maybe Squeezin' was a little too risque. And then also You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC. She was the best damn woman I've ever seen. So, again, you look back and go, Baptist minister's son, listening to these kind of songs. It really, I don't think it made any difference, type of thing. But I think I got a couple of George Carlin records and Steve Martin records. I might have listened to them more on my headphones. Not that they were really dirty, but I just didn't need that kind of hassle.
But cocaine and drugs in my pocket, nice and loud and proud.
That's fine. Yeah, there's no problem with that at all.
Okay, well, sticking with your album charts, getting back on track here, if you had been making lists between January and August 1980, what would have been under the needle the most?
One of my favorite albums in early 1980 was Pat Benatar's In the Heat of the Night album. Now, the crazy thing is that it was actually officially released in August 1979, but I didn't become aware of it or its cover until the third single broke, which was Heartbreaker, and that came out the last week in October, in which time I probably bought the album. So there really is a delay in, especially with that album. Like, I don't really know why I didn't hear the first couple singles, but when Heartbreaker came on, that's sort of my first memory of her. Now, the other big albums early in the year would have been Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Damn the Torpedoes, Pink Floyd's The Wall, one of your personal favorites, the Jay Giles Band's Love Stinks, the Pretenders' self-titled album, which now, because of the show, is one of your favorite albums.
Correct.
And also 2 of the Fab Four, hint, the Beatles, were popular again. Paul McCartney had released his very odd synthesizer one-man band album called McCartney 2, and also John Lennon had resurfaced from a 5-year sabbatical for music to release Double Fantasy, unfortunately, with his wife, Yoko Ono.
Okay, well, Double Fantasy had an interesting format. Speaking of his wife, John and Yoko each had their own songs, and they would alternate. First John, then Yoko, then another by John, and so forth. Now, when you played the album, John, did you simply just get off your bed every 3 minutes to lift the needle, or did you really take in all those Yoko songs?
Well, back in 1979, when vinyl still ruled, we certainly didn't have an option to hide, delete, or skip songs you didn't like everybody has today. I didn't have a cassette player yet, but I think a few years later, one of the first tapes I made was just of the John Lennon songs. So I'm sure at the time I tried to understand or enjoy Yoko's song. The inner sleeve has the printed lyrics, which, helped a bit. But really, I was never a fan of her stuff. And even, a few years later, in 1984, the album Milk and Honey was released. Now, that was sort of their projected follow-up before John was murdered. And again, same format, alternating songs was done. And I cannot recall even listening to the Yoko songs once.
In your opinion, your advice to listeners who want to experience John's final output is to only download or stream his songs and leave Yoko's songs off, right?
You are correct. Now, that being said, there must be some kind of constituency out there who love Yoko's music. Personally, I don't know of any of them, and I don't know why. But, music is a personal taste, right? I'm sure big Yoko fans maybe they didn't like the slower John Lennon songs on there either. Who knows?
I actually do know some big Yoko defenders, believe it or not.
Right.
I personally don't get it. I won't say it's bad. It is above me. I'm not into art with a capital A in music form, but I suppose if you're somebody who likes artists, avant-garde artists like John Cage or whatever, Yoko might make sense. To each their own.
Right.
Okay, so let's skip over to the singles you were listening to between January and August 1980. Looking at the top 50 year-end chart.
50.
Yes.
50. That's like a massive amount of songs. The most recent song
in the top 10 was at number 5. Another One Bites the Dust by Queen, of course. It entered the weekly charts on September 27th. 2 other songs were on your first chart, Coming Up by Paul McCartney, which ironically was on its way down, and Joe Walsh's All Night Long, which was on its way up, peaking at number 2 for 4 straight weeks.
So going back to your question regarding what would my big singles have been, obviously Coming Up would have easily hit number 1. Other probables would have been Crazy Little Thing Called Love by Queen, Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd, It's Still Rock and Roll to Me by Billy Joel, Blondie's Call Me, and probably Christopher Cross's Ride Like the Wind and maybe Sailing. But there was also a bunch of other huge songs out there. Some are basically one-hit wonders, but you have Whip It by Devo, Rock With You by Michael Jackson, I Don't Like Mondays by Bob Geldof, Mr. Live Aid himself, and the Boomtown Rats. And also you have cool Canadian songs like Martha and the Muffins' Echo Beach. Have you ever heard that song, Jason?
I have.
It's like an awesome opening, just the guitar and everything. It just has a very cool feel to it.
Man, I mean, between January and August, there's some pretty huge songs that you still can't escape hearing. Today, Crazy Little Thing Called Love, I heard,
right.
Played live by a cover band, just this past Saturday. It's still rock and roll to me. Stands the test of time. Okay, so as we discussed in recent episodes, looking at the 1980 year-end singles chart, it's kind of crazy how many different genres are represented here. You have classic groups or singers from the 60s still, pumping out the tunes like the Stones, McCartney, Lennon, Diana Ross, Paul Simon, all of those. Then you have all the 70s represented by the big ones, Queen, Bob Seger, Springsteen, who's still putting out music, Genesis, Billy Joel, Joe Walsh, and finally new bands and the whole new wave movement well on its way at this point. Songs by Blondie, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, The Pretenders, Gary Newman, The Police, Split Enz, and so on.
And you also have Kenny Rogers and Kim Carnes singing, it's a big crossover hit at the time, Don't Fall in Love with a Dreamer. You had, soft rock, this new soft rock super duo, Air Supply with, 2 of their big songs early in the year, Lost in Love and All Out of Love, charting high. And then looking at the year-end list, I'd really have no problem sharing it as a, top hits of 1980 playlist with anybody and feeling it was an accurate representation of the year. I just think all of the songs they weren't classics, but they were all of the time that everybody was listening to. Everything had not been splintered out and broken up at that time. I think we've said this before, that the only genre being played on my top 40 radio station was the genre of music. It was just music. So you had all these crazy different artists playing one right after the other, and that's just the way it was. And that was good, I think.
Well, I look forward to the show when we do the year-end countdown for 1980, because I have a few questions about your rating system.
Such as?
How is You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC at 45 of 50 songs? It seems like a huge mistake. Not my favorite band, but it did hit number 1 on your weekly charts for 2 weeks. What were you thinking?
I have to sort of plead insanity, really, because even when I look at that, I was surprised at that one, looking over the chart. And I'm sure we'll have a few other songs to discuss that were either too high, too low, or left off the chart entirely.
Like Funky Town by Lips Inc.?
That was not left off, and I don't know what you're talking about. But yes, that is another one of those songs where you'll go, oh yeah, that was a big hit for what reason again? But we'll get to them.
It's funny looking back. I ask myself, often, what did I miss? Like the 90s, there was a bunch of great bands in the 90s that I just was under a rock and completely missed. So 40 years later, are there bands that you love now that you either dismissed or missed at the time because you're in Southern Ontario?
I think there's like 3. I'm sure there's a lot more, but to me, there's 3. So the first one would have been Talking Heads, that in the mid to late 1970s, if I happened to be listening to an FM station, they were one of those bands that I would hear a song here and a song there, but I never bought one of their 45s. I never bought one of their albums. They were one of the bands from, the famed CBGB club in New York City that, also featured Blondie, the Ramones, the Patti Smith Band, and like Television. But it really wasn't until like 1983 with the release of the single Burning Down the House that they really gained, I think, mainstream popularity, at least, mainstream being, people like me going, that's a really cool song. Who are these people? They also had very inventive videos at the time. And I just sort of latched onto them, and I found them, they're quirky. David Burns is a very interesting songwriter and singer. And I remember, continued following them for the next couple of albums. And it wasn't until years later I really discovered their early stuff.
Now, do you think it would have fit into your rotation of music between 79 and 82? Like, does it have a spot on these charts?
I think definitely songs like Life During Wartime and Once in a Lifetime. Now, I've listened to the albums that those are both off, and I don't really have any kind of real connection to them. They're either, I don't know, too experimental. They were too experimental back then and even today, but, I loved the singles. Now, speaking of singles, one of the follow-up singles released after Burning Down the House from their the Speaking in Tongues album is called This Must Be the Place, and it is one of my favorite songs of all time. You have definitely heard it in different movies and the soundtracks. It just has this great feel to it that if it comes on, I just become relaxed and calm. And it's just, again, it's a quirky little song that I know my partner Lori goes, this is one of your favorite songs. She doesn't get it, but we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things. But please, dear listeners, search out and find the song. Once you hear it at the very start of it, you go, oh yeah, I know that song. It's such a great song.
I understand Lori's confusion. It is a bit far from your typical Springsteen enjoyment, but
it's not meat and potatoes rock. I know that.
Okay, and who is your second group that you discovered, years later that could have made a difference in your young record collecting life?
Now, I know you're not a big fan of theirs, but it'd have to be Dire Straits, but mainly for missing out on their excellent third album called Making Movies, which was released in 1980. Now, I remember seeing the music video for Skate Away. Again, find it on YouTube, everybody. Featuring a girl on roller skates. And I absolutely love the song. But again, I didn't buy the album at the time, which is now one of my favorite albums of theirs. I probably picked it up after buying their next EP. It was Love Over Gold, because I was crazy for the single called Industrial Disease. And then, of course, next came Brothers in Arms and the whole Money for Nothing and Sting from the Police. And I'm sure at that point in time, everybody and their brother went out to collect their back catalog. But like before with Talking Heads, for whatever reason, I've listened to Dire Straits' first two albums, and aside from the monster hit Sultans of Swing, I'm not really a fan at all. Making Movies, the album, however, sticks with me to this day.
Okay, and here's a little fun trivia fact.
Okay, I love trivia.
In 1978, Dire Straits began a tour as the opening band for Talking Heads.
That's crazy.
Yes, after they re-released Sultans of Swing, because it was first released as a demo and accidentally released by a radio DJ.
Accidentally.
So they got signed. They recorded it properly, although the demo sounds almost identical to the finished record.
They're like Boston then, really. Boston's first album. Their demos sound exactly like the record that was released.
And Buddy Holly's That'll Be the Day was a demo that got pressed. And
okay.
Crimson and Clover, Tommy James and the Shondells. It wasn't a demo, but it was an unfinished recording that he played for a local radio DJ. And the DJ started spinning it right away. And Morris Levy, his label exec, as a punishment said, well, you don't get to finish it. No overdubs, no mixing. This is Crimson and Clover. They're going to hear it in the raw demo format for eternity. Anyway, back to Dire Straits. So they're opening for Talking Heads, and Sultans of Swing is climbing the UK charts, and that led to the US recording contract with Warner Brothers. And before the end of '78, Dire Straits had released their self-titled debut worldwide.
Which again was that song. I didn't have it. My brother and sister didn't have it, but I just remember that song being everywhere at the time. And I didn't look up. We could probably look it up. How big or not big that song and album were. I just remember at the time it sort of being everywhere. But I think if we look at it now, it'll go, it scraped the top 40 or something. That's the thing about doing the show, Jason, and looking at my charts and then getting a feel for what else was playing, or like my song might have been number one, but I look on Wikipedia or I look on different research pages, and you find out my number one song for 2 or 3 weeks never even hit the top 40 anywhere in the entire world. And I have a feeling Sultans of Swing was kind of that way as well. But it's very cool that these two bands that I like now basically kind of started together. Like they cross paths. That's the 6 degrees of a separation between these two bands. Is 1978.
Okay, and now where on the 1980 year-end top 25 albums chart do you think you would have placed Making Movies? Top 10, top 20, near the bottom?
I think probably in the top 10, maybe top 15 range. I think I would have to rejig quite a few of the album ratings on that chart if I redid it today.
Well, maybe we can save that for another show segment.
We could call it the Revisionist episode. How's that sound?
That's actually pretty good. Okay, so you mentioned Talking Heads and Dire Straits. Who's the final act you missed during the 1980s? Is it somebody that's going to, knock me off my socks here?
I don't know if Jackson Browne knocks anybody's socks off now. But I mean, from 1971 to 1980, he had this amazing run of now classic albums and songs. But I only knew one of the songs, which was Running on Empty. Everybody knows that. If I do karaoke, which I don't do very often, I have done Running on Empty as the karaoke song, my karaoke song.
The world thanks you for not doing it very often.
I got a standing ovation. Okay, there's 2 other people in the room. They might have been standing at the time. But...
To get up and leave, maybe?
No, but I love the song. I love the song, love the album, love everything, but I didn't know anything about them. So at the end of It's June 1980. He released his only #1 Billboard album called Holdout, along with the single Boulevard, which reached #4 on the Canadian charts. So it's not like I hadn't heard the song. I remember really liking the song, but for whatever reason, never bought the single or album. So now we fly ahead a few years later, and Fast Times at Ridgemount High movie, it comes out, and the soundtrack has a song called Somebody's Baby by Jackson Browne, which turns out to be his highest charting song of all time. Of all the classic songs this guy has, it's Somebody's Baby that is his highest charter, which, again, is crazy. But like, I'm hooked at that point, and then the release of his next full album was 1983, Lawyers in Love. And, that would have been, I don't think it was the #1 album of the year, but it was very close. And at that point in time, I would have started picking up the older albums, including Holdout, which I immediately liked, although apparently, and we've said this on other shows, I really shouldn't have liked it after looking at all the reviews from 1980. So it's another one of those albums where it's like, wow, that it split his fan base and everything. And I don't know, I just dropped the needle on it and I liked what I heard. So, again, that might be another segment for another show. Albums that I shouldn't have liked that, I did. I'm sure there's a few that you have, the same experience with. They're not guilty pleasures, because a guilty pleasure is one thing. But they're just albums that you've really enjoyed, but for whatever reason, because you didn't know the whole fan base and what they were going through at the time and what their last album was, there was big expectations or there was no expectations. To me, it's music. I either like the music or I don't like the music. If it was a horrible album, I would say, it was a horrible album. But I can't say that. Other Jackson Browne people will say it is.
Well, and this surprises me. Like, we've talked about all this stuff a zillion times. In doing the podcast, there's a few surprises here and there, but generally I know this is, what you like. But this one surprises me because you're such a Jackson Browne fan now. And as long as I've known you, you're sending me Jackson Browne links and whatever. And for it to not be, at the forefront of your mind, and now you're looking at it retroactively, that's crazy. So in a parallel universe, where would Jackson Browne have fit into your 1980 year-end charts?
Well, those charts, obviously, very competitive. But I think the actual album Holdout would have been either #6 or #7, like really up that high, retrospectively. And the single Boulevard probably would also end up in the top 10.
Yep, that was a big shock. Okay, so to finish off this part of today's 1980 recap segment, at the end of the year, along with your top 50 singles and top 25 album charts, you created one more chart.
Because I really was being creative back then. So the third chart that I made was the top 15 new groups of 1980. But as we know, they were only new to me. Only a handful were. The rest were already fairly established in the musical world outside of my bedroom. However, the list shows where my musical tastes were at, and not surprisingly, the majority of these groups are still played by me quite a lot today. So again, this was the only year, as I think we've said before, that, I continued making the top whatever albums and singles charts up until 1990. So I have another, 10 years of doing this, even though my weekly charts end in August 1982. But this was the only year that I made a new groups chart because, these were the biggest groups that I had basically just found. I'd found them on my own or through radio or through like my sister's boyfriend at the time gave me Duke, the Genesis album for my birthday, and I didn't know who Genesis was. So let's count down what my top 15 new groups, again, new is in, quotation marks. Let's count them down. Jason, why don't you start us off at number 15?
Well, I'm surprised that it's low on the list, but the Pretenders.
I think they just had the one album out at the time, though. So you have to also put yourself back into, this is December 1980. They brought out one album, and I did like them, obviously. But yeah, would I rejig this now? Probably. But at the time, these are lists that I took very seriously, Jason. You don't understand how serious I was about this. So yes, the Pretenders are at 15, but maybe that was out of 70. So.
Well, it was serious enough that we're still talking about it today. So at 15, we
true.
have the Pretenders. At 14, Genesis. 13, Pink Floyd. Kind of surprised me. 12, the J. Giles Band. 11, The Cars. No surprise there. And John, who starts at number 10 for you?
Number 10 is another great John Lennon. Number 9 was Christopher Cross. Number 8, this is where Christopher Cross is really sort of the first, the Pretenders, I guess, were the first ones, but some of the new people that were coming up that were, very sort of, I'll say, important to me as a record collector or listening to. At number 8 was Split Enz, which we'll get into more on another episode. Number 7 was The Police, who again were just sort of hitting their stride. Number 6 was Pete Townsend.
Number 5, The Monks.
Yay.
Number 4, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
Uh-huh.
Now, this is truly a major surprise. I should get out my snare drum and do a drum roll here, but Bruce Springsteen at number 3.
Number 3, that's seriously, it's kind of wild. But
it seems low knowing you now, but following Queen, it makes sense.
Right. And the number 1 new artist of 1980 was the often mentioned Pat Benatar. So Jason, what are your thoughts about this? And if you want, I'll allow you an extra what were you thinking question today.
Air Supply. Like, was there a crush? Was there unrequited love? Why all these cheesy love songs with Air Supply?
I don't know. I think they were just melodic and easy on the ears, and they caught me off guard. So maybe that is one of the guilty pleasures. In my defense, I never bought one of their albums, Jason. Does that save me somehow?
Well, that absolves you for today.
Okay. I'm glad I'm absolved for today. So for me, Jason, looking back now, the most interesting thing about this list is that aside from owning their current releases, I had zero previous knowledge of many of the even then classic groups, such as, Genesis, Pink Floyd, the J. Giles Band, Pete Townsend, and by association, The Who, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and obviously, like you said, the big one, Bruce Springsteen.
Now, I vaguely remember a great story about how you discovered Bruce Springsteen and how it had a profound impact on you at the age of 14 and a half years old. It involves your minister father and a hungry heart.
A Hungry Heart, the single, not just A Hungry Heart. I was hungry at the time, but so to this point in my life, Jason, I did know 2 songs that were radio hits, but they were written by Bruce Springsteen. The first one was Manfred Mann's Earth Band's 1976 cover of Blinded by the Light, which actually went to number 1 on the Billboard Top 100, and it remains the only song associated with Bruce Springsteen that hit number 1. Also, you have 1978's Fire by the Pointer Sisters. So, like I was saying, I had zero reference for his first 4 albums, including 1975's Born to Run and the follow-up 3 years later of Darkness on the Edge of Town. But in November 1980, I was very aware of his new single, Hungry Heart, which was just released from his the double album, The River, which apparently this was like a big deal amongst Bruce Springsteen fans. But at the time, I had no clue. Now, after reading, 15 biographies and everything, I know exactly why it was a big deal. But I do remember going to the pool hall called Jammers uptown in Little West Lorne and playing Hungry Heart and John Lennon's just like starting over again, again, and again, and again.
Now, at this point, did you know John was a former Beatle? Yes?
I did, yes.
Okay, just checking. Okay, so continue with your Springsteen story.
Okay, so to recap, I had no knowledge of Bruce Springsteen's career aside from Hungry Heart on the radio, and that The River had hit number 1 on the Billboard charts after only 2 weeks. So therefore, I needed to get this album. So the courier of choice was dear old dad, who would visit parishioners from his church, currently in the hospital. And then somehow, I never really, I don't remember how he determined which record store to go to, but he would then leave the hospital and then he would find the nearest record store to pick up any of the 45s or albums that I'd given him instructions to purchase with my hard-earned paper route money to buy for that week. And because I was making my music charts by then, 2 specific dates in 1980 stick out, Jason. The first one is Thursday, November 27th, which was my dad's 61st birthday, and also the day that he brought home a copy of Born to Run, which I remember was on sale at a Sam the Record Man store in Chatham for $4.99. And then the following day, on Friday, November 28th, my dad brought home a copy of The River, which was on sale in London. So he was traveling a lot, going up and down Highway 401 in southwestern Ontario, and along the way purchasing these 2 albums for me.
So we have this in common. I know Born to Run is not only your favorite Bruce record, but also your favorite album of all time.
Correct.
Did that happen upon first listen or after many listens that weekend? Were you only listening to The River and then eventually found Born to Run? What happened?
So it's really hard to explain what exactly occurred. But Jason, honestly, from the first moment the needle landed on the opening track, which is the beloved Thunder Road, until the final,
I got chills.
Until the final desperate howls of Bruce at the end of the last track, which is Jungle Land. Honestly, it was like a switch in my head had been flicked on like no other artist or group had before or really since. After 8 songs running 38 minutes and 23 seconds, I was a 100% convert, never to look back. And I know we'll talk more about this crazy event in future shows, especially during the recap of the week ending November 28th, 1980. But I swear that on a random Thursday in November in 1980, I was unaware of Bruce Springsteen, and 2 days later, he became my favorite artist of all time. Now, Jason, do you have... I know that story is like fantastic and unbelievable. Okay. and I get that, but I also think that you can talk to movie directors who will say, you know, I kind of like movies, but then I walked into the theater and I saw this movie and I walked out and my life had changed. So for you, like to me, listening to Born to Run changed my life, you know, in a lot of ways, not significantly that, you know, all of a sudden I became, you know, a musician or I opened a record store or something crazy. My life continued on in the background, obviously. But from a music standpoint, Bruce Springsteen became its focus, and I loved everything that he had done up to that point, aside from album 2, but that's another story. But you know, after hearing this, is there any group or album that for the very first time that you heard it that influenced your life in some way from that day forward? You're a sound engineer now. There must be, I'm guessing there's an album that you listen to and go, I don't know how they did that, but I'm going to figure it out.
Well, a good segue, I mean, with the movie thing, Born to Run is one of those for me, for sure. I remember the first time I was aware of Springsteen, but I hadn't really, you know, gotten into him. I didn't like Born in the USA. I didn't like any of that, you know, poppy 80s stuff that he did. But when I listened to Born to Run the first time, cover to cover, my eyes were closed the whole time, and I felt like I had just watched a 3-hour movie, but it was only 38 minutes. So that changed me as far as the way music can be used as a vehicle in storytelling, that it can shut off your brain and create imagery like that.
It's very cinematic.
It is.
That whole album is just, again, you can close your eyes and just go on this trip that happens all basically over one night period. And that's the theme through the whole thing, that this all takes place in one night.
And the funny thing is, I don't pay attention to lyrics in music like you do. And that came across just in the sound of the music, that it felt like that one really long summer night from when you were a preteen or a young teen, that just felt like it would last forever. And that came across in 38 minutes and 23 seconds. So Springsteen for sure. Probably Dark Side of the Moon was the other one.
Okay.
Cover to cover. I remember turning it off and just being shook.
Okay.
There were sounds moving around my head, and I hadn't touched any drugs at this point in my life. And
I would hope not.
And I got lost in it. And when I say got lost, I mean for weeks and weeks on end, I would put on headphones and walk around the house. I would go rollerblading on my way to work, on the bus, anywhere I was. Dark Side of the Moon was playing cover to cover.
Right. See, at least you had the advent of, a Walkman or something. I had the album. I couldn't take the album, with me on my, later in life. Maybe, I had a paper route from age 8 until 16. Now, if I was 20 years, further in the future like you are, and I'm 8 years old and I'm doing a paper route, I'm sure I would have headphones on, listening to all this music, and enjoying it even more. But at the time, I just had the album, which has a fantastic gatefold to it, and all the words are listed there. And I think that was part of the appeal to it. But just, it was something completely different. Born to Run, the album, the way it's structured, the way it sounds, the way its storytelling is just so completely different than anything on a Pat Benatar album or a Tom Petty 3-minute song album or Jay Giles Band, Love Stinks, or, and it really, it stopped me in my tracks for 38 minutes and, 23 seconds or whatever, because it was something completely different that I completely latched onto. And like you asked, you asked earlier, did that weekend when I got, now I have these 3 albums. I have the double album of The River with Hungry Heart, and then I have Born to Run. And I'll tell you right now, Jason, that I wasn't that impressed with The River because it was not as good songwriting, imagery as Born to Run. There are songs on that album that are very good, and they're storytelling songs, and I love those, like The River and Stolen Car and that. But there was too many party songs, and like it seemed to me they were just like throwaway songs, and I didn't understand how he went from this masterpiece over here of Born to Run, and 5 years later he's a rocking pop star. Okay, he hasn't hit the heights of Born the USA. That's another 4 years away, but I couldn't wrap my head around it. And my enjoyment of The River probably wasn't as big as it would have been if I had never heard Born to Run the night before, which seems crazy. Which seems crazy.
Yeah, one the difference of one night and which album. Now it's funny you mentioned the gatefold and the lyrics sitting there. That's a big difference, from just your generation to even the generation following when cassette tapes were out. That experience of sitting cross-legged on the floor, you can't skip a song, you're reading it from cover to cover. And that experience is still sticking with us today because as of last week, officially worldwide, vinyl sales have outsold CDs, cassettes, any other physical medium.
Right.
years and years later, we've been listening to records, since the turn of the 20th century, and here we are going back, crossing our legs, opening that gatefold. Most albums now, you buy it and people don't even have record players necessarily. They get the digital download, listen to it on their phone, and sit with that gatefold. And you can't replace that experience. And I wish I had that experience with Born to Run the first time. I loved mine, but that would have been pretty special.
No, and again, I love that album, and his first album that came out, his debut album, again, same thing. There's gatefold, there's words all over, and this is fantastic. And then the second album came out, and there's no gatefold, and there's no lyrics, and I, for whatever reason, don't like that album as much as all the other ones. And again, I'm like, what if they would have put the lyrics in it? Would I have just, loved the second album as much as I do the first one, and obviously Born to Run the third one? Like, I don't know. But I now have, a negative thoughts towards that second one, even when it comes on, going, nah, I don't like this. But maybe at the time I might have, if they would have added lyrics. The other crazy thing about, I was saying that, The River to me is, it's a good album. And, it started off as a single album that he handed in, and then he took it back and he goes, no, I need to add more songs. And it's a whole process, right? But I remember working in a record department in a department store when I was in college, and one of the female clerks, she was a huge Springsteen fan, so we had lots to talk about. But when we rated the albums up to that point, so Born to Run would have been released by then, and Nebraska, I think, would have been released by then. Her number one album by far was The River, and I just looked at her like she was crazy.
She is, absolutely. How dangerous is that? You working in a record store? That's like the time I spent managing a music store.
Oh, it's crazy. It's me being an author owning a bookstore. Like, I don't know. And yet here I am, Jason, still spending time
here you
thinking about 40 years ago.
That's what I have to look forward to, I guess.
Okay, well, that sort of concludes our review of the AM radio music scene between January and early August 1980, leading to the creation of my very first music chart in August. Now, be sure to like and follow our Facebook and Instagram pages, where you'll find relevant pictures, information, and of course, the actual typewritten charts to review and debate among yourselves, family, and friends.
And feel free to give us your comments about the show, about what songs you loved in the early 80s, and which ones you also ask yourself, what was I thinking? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. What was John thinking? I heard the song now. 40 years ago, it was still it had to be a horrible song 40 years ago. Yet he put it at number 3. I don't get it. Now be sure to join us next week when we review not 1, not 2, but 3 charts, number 8, 9, and 10, covering the rest of October 1980. Until then, keep rocking like there's no tomorrow, and thanks for listening.
The Music Virgins No More podcast was recorded in Amherstburg, Ontario and Lloydminster, Alberta.